You're watching Fish on Friday. I'm Lucian Leone, and I am joined today by a very special guest, Brother Jim Boynton. And Jim currently is the president of U of D High School. That's where we're at right now in Detroit. But he's soon going to be moving on to another assignment in Milwaukee. But the reason I wanted to have Brother Jim on is because, well, for so many reasons, but mainly because he's the author of this book called Fishers of Men, which I think you wrote as a master's, part of your master's degree.
That shows how long ago. You can see that picture of me when I was 9 years old.
Yeah, right, exactly. So I got to meet Brother Jim because of a mutual friend, Keith Witter, who's one of my neighbors. And after talking to Keith, who'd been a historian up at Fort Michilimackinac for many years, he said to me, "Oh, you've got to meet Brother Jim," for all kinds of reasons. And so thank you, Keith, for making that introduction. And thank you, Brother Jim, for being willing to be our guest.
It's an honor. It really is.
So we have a lot of things we can talk about, but I think the place to start, Brother Jim, is for you to just kind of give some background to your life, because to me, you are such an example of what these great men like Father Marquette, how they can inspire generations of others. So if you could just kind of tell your story, that would be awesome.
Sure. So I was born in St. Ignace, Michigan, Snigness, going on 60 years ago, but I was born there. And St. Ignace was founded by Father Marquette in 1671. It was an old Jesuit mission. It's one of the oldest towns in St. Ignace, one of the oldest towns in Michigan. On my mother's side, on my mother's father's side, we go back at least 8 generations. Goodrow is the maiden name, and through the Goodrow family, I'm also a proud member of the Sioux tribe of Chippewa Indians. And
So you would actually be a Métis
I would be a Métis, yes.
Because
I am a Métis. Yes.
He talked about Métis not too long ago. Anyway.
Yeah, very, very much. And I love that. My mother's family, they were Cheesemans. And we could really get into a lot of fun Michigan history on that. But they were part of the Mormon kingdom on Beaver Island.
Really? Oh, yeah. That's an amazing story.
Yeah. So Alonzo Cheeseman was a follower of King James Jesse Strang and was on Beaver Island. And then when James Jesse Strang was murdered and the Mormon kingdom was broken up, he moved to St. Ignace with his 3 wives. So here I don't have any wife, and he had 3. Still buried out at the Grocap Cemetery. He's got 2 wives buried next to him. The 3rd wife is buried in Sheboygan. That's my mother's side. My father's side, the Boynton family goes back to the 1800s in St. Ignace. My great-great-grandfather was Commodore Lewis R. Boynton, and he was a ship captain. And his claim to fame was that when in piloting a ship, he realized that if he went in reverse, that the hull of the ship, the propellers sucked the water out from the ice was then unsupported, and then with the ship you could crush the ice. And so what he did was put propellers on the front and the back, the hull and the stern, and so a boat could go forward and backward. And he's credited along with a naval architect named Frank Kirby of inventing the icebreaker boat.
Wow.
His brother was Nathan Boynton, who was the founder of Boynton Beach, Florida. There's no money there for any of us, but that's kind of fun.
So at some point he moved from St. Ignace down to...
No, both of those Boynton brothers started in Port Huron, and Lewis R. moved to St. Ignace, and then his brother moved down to Florida. And then, so those are we have 4 grandparents, so 3 of them go way, way, way back in St. Ignace, and then my dad's mother, she was from Wisconsin, in Irish heritage. So growing up in St. Ignace, I absolutely always loved history and the stories of the old people, and I would listen to my grandparents But I also went around and I listened to the old people in town. I loved to hear their stories. Two in particular, Lawrence Bushy was born in 1903, January 7th, 1903. And he was a boy. He worked in the lumber camps. He worked on the Great Lakes ships. And he was a cookee in the lumber camps. He quit school when he was a boy and went off to work. And I just love to hear his stories. Right across the street, these were friends of my grandfather's. Right across the street was Eddie Tebow. Eddie was born July 13th, 1899. He was in World War I. He was in World War II. He worked in the lumber camps as well. He worked on the Great Lakes. And I just would love to hear their stories. I've always been fascinated just to hear about the lumber camp days and the old fishing days. Part of the story of St. Agnes is the Native American history, and then part of it is also the missionary history, Jacques Marquette. And Father Marquette became a real hero of mine. My grandfather's brother, William Goodrow, who grew up in St. Agnes, he joined the Jesuits in 1939. And in 1946, he went to India as a missionary, just in my mind, just like Marquette. He went there, he learned the languages, lived with the people, learned their way of life, tremendous respect for the people, for their way of life, saw a lot of great there, a lot of sacred already present, and then incorporate into that the message of Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
And I was very lucky, 1991, after joining the Jesuits for a while, I got to spend the year with him. And that was just...
And where was that?
That was in India.
That was in India?
In Bihar, India.
Wow.
Patna, outside of Patna. So that, growing up, obsessed with history. The other thing that I'm obsessed with is music. I've always loved music.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was a sophomore in high school at Crossdose barn sale, I purchased a fiddle. And the music that I play now still is the music of the French-Canadian Voyageurs. Father Deblon, who was a Jesuit missionary, he played music. And the joke with my friends is I was born in 1967. Any song written after 67 I won't play. It's got to be old. And so.
Well, and I was sad to learn that, because I think you've gone up to, on the Feast of St. Anne in, July 26th?
July 26th.
You typically go to St. Anne's on Mackinac Island and you...
Call a square dance.
And you call a square dance, which
Yeah.
I had the privilege and joy, my wife and I and some friends, being there last year, but you won't be able to do it this year.
Well, I will be on Mackinac a little bit. I'll get up there. We'll certainly do a square dance or two. It's almost a happy thing in a way in that St. Anne's Feast Day this year falls on a Sunday.
Yeah.
So the normal festivities that we would have had would be supplanted by the Sunday. And so, you know, a feast day like that is when it falls on a Sunday, you celebrate the Sunday.
Right.
So it's a good year to miss if I'm going to miss a year.
Okay, but you will be back again next year, hopefully.
That would be my plan.
If your schedule and life allows, so.
As Hank Williams used to say, if the good Lord's willing and the creek don't rise.
Yes, okay, good. So, yeah, I would suggest our listeners to put that on your schedule if you can, because
Yeah.
it's really a wonderful time to be there. And I would love for you to chat, now that we're speaking about St. Anne's,
Yeah.
a little bit about the museum that's in the lower level and kind of your role in all of that.
Okay. So when I was I'm going to give you the long answer. Okay. When I was a kid, I was a tour guide at Marquette's gravesite. And then right after high school, when I graduated high school, I started as a tour guide at Fort Mackinac. I was also a tour guide in Mackinac City. But early on, I can tell you the year, it was 1983. I just happened to be walking by St. Anne's and met the pastor there and got involved with that parish and was involved ever since. In 1996, the pastor was Father Jim Williams, and I was I was doing a master's degree. As a Jesuit, I was doing a master's degree on the history of the Jesuits at Mackinac. And Father Jim Williams, who was the pastor, who I'd known since I was a small boy, asked me if I would do a museum. And I actually had been collecting for that museum since I was about 14.
Wow.
And it was just wonderful. Worked with a guy named Lou Caruso, Jim Morris, who still works at St. Anne's. Father Jim helped, Phil Porter helped. My sisters helped with the writing of the museum, and my parents were certainly involved, Father Jim. But over the course of that summer, based on the work that I did with Fishers of Men, we put together a very nice museum. I remember saying to Phil, how long does a museum last? And he said, oh, about 25 years. Well, that's about what it's been now.
Yeah.
I don't know if we're going to give it a facelift anytime soon, but
Well, I can say I was there for the first time last summer.
it still looked good.
It looked great.
Okay, good.
And so for any of our visitors who happen to make their way up to Mackinac Island, and if you go to St. Anne's, don't miss going to the lower level because you're in for a treat. It's a wonderful museum.
It's a wonderful museum, it's a wonderful parish, and it's a wonderful ministry.
Yeah.
The parish goes back over 300 years that there's been a Roman Catholic presence at the Straits, and I just think it's fantastic.
Yeah.
And so for many, many years, I'm in administration now, but when I was teaching, and I worked in vocations for the Jesuits too, in the summers I would go up there and I would run the summer programs for St. Anne's. And I was mostly with the foreign workers. We had a lot of workers from Mexico City, a lot of workers from the Philippines, Jamaica, and then just regular American workers. And we did meals and dances and celebrations. Had so much fun. My folks were part of that. Those were just wonderful years. And we always would make sure at some point in the summer that we got the workers off the island, take them to Tequamanon Falls, get them for a cookout. And a happy thing is when I left there about 9 years ago, I moved into administration and didn't have the summers off. I was very sad. I thought all this stuff that we had done and built up over the years is what's going to happen to it. Well, it's blossomed and it's grown. There's an organization now called Mackinac Connect. It's an ecumenical, and they get all the young people, the international workers, connected on Mackinac Island for social, for faith, for fun, and they have the meals, they have the outings, they have the social events, they have met the community hall, they have met St. Anne's Church, they do the language lessons, and it's really cool how that's taken off.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Great. Well, you
Yeah.
kind of alluded to it. I'd love to start by you giving us a little bit deeper insight into Father Marquette, the man, the legend, the myth, but I think ultimately the missionary. And because I think so often, because if you ever go to Mackinac Island, you see his statue there in front of the fort, and you
Yep.
see the chapel. But we know about him for being an explorer. And I think sometimes I think his role as a Jesuit missionary almost can get overlooked. And I would just love for you to kind of talk a little bit about his life.
So Father Jacques Marquette, I actually wrote some dates down here because I'm getting old. I don't have them on the back of my head as I used to. Born in Lyon, France, 1637. But he grew up in France when France was a world power, when France was at the height of its colonization, if that's a good thing or a bad thing, depends on your point of view, I guess. If you've ever heard of the Jean-Baptiste de La Salle, the French Christian brothers here in Detroit, I'm at University of Detroit Jesuit High School, but there's a de La Salle school. Mm-hmm. Jacques Marquette's cousin was Jean-Baptiste de La Salle. Mm-hmm. And he joined the Society of Jesus, an international order at that time, and he was inspired. He wanted to be a missionary, like St. Francis Xavier was. He had hoped to go to India, and did some education a ton of education in Europe, and taught for a bit in Europe. Got some training in map making in natural sciences, theology, philosophy, French, Latin, Greek, and volunteered for the missions in India and was instead sent to New France. And his role model, and when you read his journals, his writings, his role model, he tried to pattern his life after the Blessed Virgin. And what he meant by that was, Lord, be it done unto me according to your will. Or whatever happens, we're going to let this happen. And I'm in 100%. So he came to New France. He first landed in a place called Sillery. It's just outside of Quebec, and you can still go there today. It's where all the Jesuits who landed, the first thing that any Jesuit would do.
Oh, is that near Three Rivers, or is
No,
that
it's right near Quebec.
near Quebec? Okay.
Quebec City, I think it's just south of Quebec. The first thing any Jesuit does, and I can tell you this from firsthand experience, when you're sent to a foreign place, you have to learn the language. And so he immersed himself in the studies of indigenous languages. And he was quite a linguist. You know, to learn a language means, you know, it's another way to communicate, but it's also, you understand how people think. And when you understand how people think and see the world, if anyone out there speaks another language, you do, once you get conversant, you just realize that you're thinking a whole different way. Sometimes you wake up in the middle of the night and you realize, oh my gosh, I was just dreaming.
Yeah.
And whatever. So he learned the languages to get to know the people. The whole Jesuit philosophy is you're not bringing God. God's there. You're not bringing the sacred is there. It's not that you're not introducing, in a way, the sacred to people, because all people are made in the image and likeness of God. How do you introduce someone to someone that they're made in the image and likeness of? So, but he would introduce the Christian message then, and through a knowledge of the people. He eventually got up where he could speak 6 indigenous languages. And some just wonderful things about him. A lot of people I think know about Jean de Brebeuf, Isaac Jogues, Rene Goupil.
Right.
These were wonderful men, and they were caught up in just a whirlwind of culture, emotion, politics, religion. They're the ones who were the North American martyrs. He is the generation after that.
Right.
And so when he comes, he already has a group of Wyandot Christian Hurons. He worked with them to avoid the Iroquois wars. He took them to the west of Lake Superior, to the mission of Saint-Esprit, the Holy Spirit mission, near Ashland, Wisconsin today. Was in Sault Ste. Marie. Eventually he settled this Christian group in the middle of the Great Lakes, the heart of the Great Lakes, the heart of the freshwater world, the Straits of Mackinac, where the majority of the world's freshwater all come together. He originally started that mission on Mackinac Island, a place sacred to the indigenous people. Moved it just north in 1 year to St. Agnes, where he established the mission there. But always a Jesuit phrase coming from St. Ignatius. There's a lot of them. But one is the magis, the more. What is the more? And the more that he wanted was to spread the area of influence and contact with Native peoples even more. And it's so hard for us today in 2026, the United States, to think of religion as a branch of the government, but France was a Catholic nation. The official church was the Roman Catholic Church. So wherever France spread, the church would spread. And so his dream was to find the great river to the west, which would then lead them to China, of course, in his mind. And he had heard about the Mississippi. Others had heard about it. Joliet, who was also who had studied at one point to be a Jesuit, was explorer, and through being missioned by his superiors, certainly with the blessing and encouragement of the state of the state government of France, they set out on a journey to find this great river to the west. But some things that I just think are so key. I'm going to give a little background in this because for some people it might sound jarring. But the background is this: so much of Christianity, certainly so much of Roman Catholicism, practices have been based on pagan religions. And what we have done over time is we have baptized those practices. And I'm going to say 98% of the people watching this might think, well, what do you mean we've baptized pagan practices? Christmas is the feast of the Roman sun god. Christmas tree is a pagan practice. The wreath, Easter eggs, that's a pagan. It's a celebration of Easter itself. Take the spring equinox. So let's have that be the celebration of the resurrection of the Lord. And so many things around Christmas, around Easter, Halloween, All Saints Day. So much religious art is all been baptized, by the Catholics. Marquette did the same thing, but rather than with ancient Greek or Roman, he did it with Native American.
Yeah.
One of the things that is just amazing to me is that Father Marquette was a pipe carrier. So that means he carried the peace pipe. He was presented by the indigenous people, by Native, he was presented a peace pipe, which is no small thing. That wouldn't happen with just anyone. He would use that as a symbol of peace. And when he was coming into a village, he would hold up the calumet, the peace pipe, and the cross at the same time as he was coming into a village of indigenous, and thus giving the message, I come in peace. And not only do I come in peace on my terms, I come in peace on your terms. I have the pipe. He would smoke the pipe with them. He obviously, as I said, he learned the language, and he had tremendous respect. And so wherever he would go, yes, he was European, he was French, he was Catholic, he was a male, he was white, he was part of a colonial power. He was also a fellow human being, looking at human beings that he knew were made in the image and likeness of God, ransomed by the blood of Jesus Christ, as it's written in the Jesuit Relations in the notes, and he loved them, and he was respected. He explored down as far as you could go in the Mississippi River to understand that this was not the great river to the west, but it flows out into the south. He did not want to get entangled and meshed up with the Spanish, who was also a Catholic nation and also had Jesuits, and St. Ignatius was a Spaniard. But the two nations weren't exactly friends at the time.
Well, I just briefly,
Yeah.
so often when we think of American history, it's really written from a perspective of New England, and because that's where the Pilgrims came over and the Mayflower and on and on and on. We really forget that in addition to New England, there was also New France and there was New Spain.
Very
and
much.
these three empires were all jockeying for position in this continent in a way that I think we tend to overlook that fact. We tend to look at our English connection in a way that I think is a little bit more outsized to the reality, but anyway.
And we could go down a million rabbit holes here. There were Jesuits with all three of these missions. Maryland was a Catholic.
Yep.
John Carroll was a Jesuit.
John Carroll was Jesuit?
John Carroll was the first American priest.
Yep.
He was a Jesuit. Now, if you know your Jesuit history, we might get into this. At one point, the Society of Jesus was suppressed.
Right.
And he had been a Jesuit, and then when the order was suppressed, he became then a former Jesuit. The Jesuits in Maryland once the order was suppressed, they continued to stay together. They no longer called themselves the Society of Jesus. They called themselves the Roman Catholic Gentlemen of Maryland, founded Georgetown University. And then when the order was reinstated, 1814, then it became a Jesuit university. But it was founded by ex-Jesuits, and John Carroll was one of those.
Wow, I didn't know that. Well,
Yeah, there
thank
you
you,
have
Brother
it.
Jim.
So Marquette.
So yeah, Marquette,
Yeah,
back
so
to him.
Marquette is going down the Mississippi River, meeting many people, making friends, trying to avoid enemies. On the way back, he started getting sick. He was in his late 30s. He was a young man. He got a horrible case of dysentery, and it just kept getting worse and worse. And he really, what he wanted to do was get back to St. Ignace. He wanted to get back there. When he left, he said, "I'm coming back," and he died on his way back. A couple things about his death, one ancient and one new. The ancient one is when he died, he was surrounded by his friends, both native and European. He wrote out his confession on a piece of paper to give to the Jesuits in Quebec, but when he died, it was written about him that he was all things to all people. To the Iroquois, he was an Iroquois. To the Huron, he was a Huron. To the Ojibwe, he was an Ojibwe. I mean, obviously from Scripture, but he was
A true Jesuit in that sense.
All things
Yeah.
to all things to all people.
Yeah.
Jumping forward now 300 years, there's a long convoluted history of the remains of Marquette. And a number of years ago, I was with a group of people, indigenous people from St. Ignace, who petitioned Marquette University, who was holding the remains of Marquette. He had died near Ludington, was buried in St. Ignace a couple years later.
Now, did the Native Americans
Yeah,
actually?
yeah,
Okay, so
they brought him up
if you could
and-
tell that story
Oh,
just
so-
briefly, yeah.
So he died near Ludington, and a few years later.
And there's a big monument.
Oh,
to
there's a
him.
big monument there. Yeah.
Yep.
In fact, a friend of mine sent me just a picture of just the cross a while ago. Said, "You won't know where this is." I wrote back and said, "You're in Ludington." Anyway, that was Mike Gill. Hi, Mike. So he was brought back with great ceremony.
Yeah.
They unearthed him in a sign of native respect. They dried his bones in the sun. In an entourage with about 30 canoes, they bring him back to St. Ignace. They buried him in the chapel, which was it's all described in the letters of the Jesuits.
Mm-hmm.
That mission was abandoned about 1708. So right around in there.
So he died in 1675.
Yep.
So that mission was abandoned in 1708?
Yeah,
Okay.
briefly,
Yeah.
but it was burned to the ground, and there was always some presence there, but primarily then moved to Mackinac City, which was the southern side of the Straits. It
Oh,
wasn't
but you were
called
talking about his bones. So
Yes.
he was, and what I love about that story is you can see that the Native Americans must have really, not only respected him, but really loved him. If they're going to come from St. Ignace down to Ludington,
Bring them up.
bring him back, that just to me,
Yeah.
it speaks volumes of what they thought of
Christian
him.
and non-Christian.
Yes.
Yeah. I shouldn't say, Christian and indigenous religion. So, now jump forward a few years ago. Well, that mission was abandoned. In 1877, it was rediscovered, which was really very cool, by a man, last name of Grondin, a Native American. And he was clearing some land for a man by the last name of Murray. And he discovered in clearing the land remains of what he thought was the mission. They ran and got
And this is in St. Ignace?
this is in St. Ignace,
Okay.
1877.
Okay.
They ran and got the diocesan priest, Father Edmund Yacker, and in an 1877 sort of a way, they did excavations. And yep, sure enough, these are the bones of Marquette. This is the mission, and those bones were sent to Marquette University in Milwaukee, where they sat in the archives. and we petitioned and we got him back. And a couple years ago, we were having a very wonderful ceremony of reburying him in the native traditional way. And there was a kid there who I've known all his life. His name is Jamie Andrus. His father was Donald the Duck, Chief Andrus on Mackinac Island. Jamie's a great kid. He's a great artist. He's gone with me on medical brigades to Latin America. He's a wonderful magician and just a great young man. But takes a lot of pride in his Native American heritage. And he said to me, you know, I'm not sure I'm a big fan of this, Father Marquette. I said, that's okay. And, you know, there's a lot, this is a lot of complicated history.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a history teacher, and I certainly get the complications. And so Jamie said, you know, I don't know if he wanted me to try to convince him or to argue, but I didn't argue. I just said, that's fine, you know. As we were burying Marquette, an American eagle, bald eagle, flew over, and this is downtown St. Ignace,
Yeah.
flew right over where we were burying him and hovered above. I lived in St. Ignace the first 20 years of my life, never saw an eagle downtown. And that eagle hovered over where we were. The sun was in that you could see the eagle and the sun behind him, and then the eagle just kind of went off. And Jamie looked at me and he said, oh, I think I like Father Marquette.
Wow. So what year was it that the bones were actually
I think that was 3 years ago.
recently?
Yeah,
Wow.
3-4 years ago.
And so now when you go to St. Ignace, it's actually that church is now is it the Ojibwe Cultural
Museum of Ojibwe Culture.
And he's right.
He's right at the side.
Right,
Yep.
and to me, that seems completely
Oh,
appropriate.
it's amazing, yeah.
Because those are the people he served.
Yeah.
And so anyway, so yes, you can all see that up in St. Ignace, and it's a wonderful visit.
So that's Marquette. I mean, again, the man who patterned his life after the Blessed Virgin, who saw people as created in the image and likeness of God, wanted to learn as much about them as he could, adopted their ways,
Yeah.
introduced the Christian message through their door, and respected them tremendously. And some took the message and followed and became Catholics, and others did not, and he loved them all.
Yeah.